All right, we are live.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. I am Kathy Weaver. I am the director of the Information Challenge Initiative, the group that gets to host all of the fun information challenges through the year. The last 2 weeks, we've been hosting the Information Challenge Summer Camp for high school students throughout Maryland. Last week, we had an in-person camp that was on at UMD. The students got to be at UMD and get to do a lot of college type things. And then this week we had a virtual camp so we could include people further out from the College Park area, people that weren't able to get to campus on a daily basis. So what we're doing right now is we are treating the campers to an information panel. It includes some really excellent information professionals, a variety of people that do a variety of jobs in information. We want the campers to see all of the different types of things that you can do if you're interested in information and really understand that information is everywhere. So I'm going to turn this over to Andy Fellows. He's a faculty at the University of Maryland College of Information Studies and one of my favorite people. And he's going to be moderating. So I'm going to turn my camera off and let you go.
Hey, everybody. I'm Andy Fellows, or Andrew Fellows, as it says on the screen. I'm happy, really proud to be your moderator today's panel. I'm so excited and proud of you all for being part of the Information Challenge this summer camp, and I hope you've been getting as much out of it as I think you have been. I want to tell you a little bit about myself. When I got out of college, when I graduated from Boston University way back in 1980, I decided I wanted to make the world a better place. So that was kind of my career goal. And I ended up doing political work for about a decade of doing work around affordable and safe energy for all, holding polluters accountable for toxic waste, healthcare for all kinds of initiatives, and in general, doing grassroots organizing throughout the country. And I came back to graduate school at Maryland with the idea of further study of culture and politics, the importance of culture and politics in terms of decision making and making the world a better place. And when I finished my master's program, by that time I had moved to College Park. And I realized what an opportunity it was to sort of have the university in a place where it could collaborate with communities. I ended up doing 15 years as Chesapeake Regional Director for a national environmental organization called Clean Water Action. And then I decided I really wanted to work locally on sustainability. And during that time, I was politically active with a nonprofit, Clean Water Action. I also became an elected official, and I ended up serving 6 years as the mayor of the city of College Park. And so I'm hopeful that if you all haven't already been to campus, that you all will come to College Park and attend university here, frankly. I came to work at the University of Maryland with the idea of building a collaboration between the university and surrounding communities around sustainability and resiliency. I'm now in my 8th year at the university, and I'm continuing to do that. I'm now full-time with the College of Information Studies, the iSchool, and my passion is working with students like you and faculty and staff at the University of Maryland to collaborate with the partners and community partners in this area. So I'm really, really pleased to be able to moderate this panel, because I think you're going to learn so much from the panelists. I'm going to introduce each of them individually. They're all going to speak for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then hold your questions. If you have questions for people, hold them to the end, because we're going to go right through and have each person speak in turn. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. And she is Nekabare Siagalo, and she is the lead scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton. Dr. Sigala?
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, we'll start with that. Okay, all right. Hello, everyone. My name is Nekabari Sagalo. Everyone calls me Nikki. So if you want to call me Nikki, that's totally fine. And I am a lead scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton. I'm also a PhD candidate here at the iSchool, and I'm also an instructor at the iSchool. So I think I'll basically talk about my career journey according to the 3 points that we were asked to highlight today. Okay, so the path that led me to a career in information. So as a daughter of Nigerian parents, that's always a running joke. The expectation is really to finish your first degree and then go on to medical school, no matter what it takes. So my original plan was to go to medical school and become a doctor, but I ultimately decided that that was not the profession for me for various reasons. I do not like blood. I didn't want to be in school for too long. So I decided that I did not want to go to medical school. So I went on and got my bachelor's in biological science from Georgia State University. And then I went on and got my master of public health and epidemiology from Emory University. And it was really during my master's program that I realized how intriguing data can be. So for those of you who are not familiar with what epidemiology is, in an epidemiology program, you're really just trained to be able to extract trends and insights from healthcare data, as we all saw with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it was really in that program that I realized how ubiquitous data can be. And number two, that I really wanted to move forward with a career working with data. So my expertise lies primarily in data engineering, data science, and data analytics, specifically in the healthcare research industry. But as I continue to grow my skill set, I really realized that these are skills that are easily transferable across many different industries. So I'm sure if I wanted to go into fintech or any other industry, the skills are transferable. So that's a nice thing about that. So after grad school, I moved from Atlanta to DC, and I worked for a company called Mathematica for 6 years, where I primarily did data engineering and analysis of government healthcare data. In that role, I also grew in more leadership roles. I became a supervisor. I was also able to do some recruiting. So that was the role where I truly grew as an information professional, I think. So 2 years into that role, I decided that I wanted to go back to school. And I decided that I really wanted to be in a position not only to just execute the analyses that I was working on every day as a programmer, but I also wanted to wear the hat of the researcher who was essentially the brain of the entire operation, right? So I started my PhD in 2018 at the iSchool, and my primary focus when I started, I was really just interested in the application of data science and machine learning and the intersection in the healthcare sector. But I was able to narrow down my focus more to using social media data in order to answer complex questions that are related to public health and well-being. And fingers crossed, I'll actually be defending my dissertation in just a few months. So fingers crossed there. So moving on to present day, after 6 years working at Mathematica, earlier this year, I actually left Mathematica and I moved on to my current position as a lead scientist at Booz Allen Hamilton. So in my current position, I am the software development lead on the COVID-19 response team at the CDC, which is actually a really cool role. I don't know why they call me a software developer. That's not what I do. I work mostly with data, but that's the name of the role. So in that role, I currently lead a team of analysts, and we basically maintain a data pipeline that tracks all of the COVID cases since the beginning of the pandemic. So if you've ever had COVID, you went and got tested at a pharmacy or anywhere, I have your data in my data set. So we basically do a lot of data ingestion and cleaning from all 50 states, plus the territories as well. And we essentially make that data, we clean it, de-identify it, and make that data available on a publicly available, in a publicly available data set called the COVID data tracker. So I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with what that is, but it's a CDC website. We basically have public use data sets for researchers or pretty much anyone who wants to work with COVID data. So in that role, I also do a lot of dashboard development, some more descriptive analyses, but it's actually a really cool way to contribute to public health and well-being by being on the COVID-19 response. So it's actually a really cool role. All right, so my passions in the information field. So I would say that my passions are fueled mostly by the fact that you can use data to answer so many complex problems and also to inform important policies. And I've always had a passion for improving public health and well-being and addressing health disparities. As you can see, I basically stayed in the healthcare sector for my entire career. And I'd like to actually stay there for the remainder of my career. So being a PhD student, I feel like that has truly fueled my interest in being in the information field, just because I've been able to do my own independent studies and truly see how information can make a difference in the world. So one example that I like to highlight specifically to why I'm so passionate about this is that I recently published a paper like 2 weeks ago where I developed a predictive model using geotagged Twitter data for the identification of food deserts in the United States, basically using information that I extracted from social media, from Twitter, essentially. So if you're an individual who was tweeting about pizza or cookies or something like that, I basically extracted the nutritional content from your tweet to try to see if you were living in an area that basically didn't have sufficient access to healthy foods. So I thought that was a really important research problem, or just a problem in general, because that type of algorithm, that type of model really allows researchers to monitor food insecurity more frequently than more traditional methods would allow, such as surveys or field surveys or traditional surveys. And it can also be used by stakeholders in order to advocate for policy interventions that will actually address food insecurity in the United States. What are some things that I think will inspire the next generation of information professionals? I feel like I have so many thoughts on that, but I would just say that if you are truly considering or just thinking about a career in the information field, just go for it. I'm someone who's very type A, and I'm a very practical person. So aside from loving what I do, I would just say being in this field, it really makes sense to me because it's, I think, recession proof, it's pandemic proof, as we saw, and the money isn't bad either. Number two, it's also, to be honest, it's a very challenging field, I think, but it's also very rewarding. So I've been able to work on so many different complex problems, from working with healthcare data and claims data from the federal government to now working on the COVID-19 response. So there's really no limit to what you can do in a field working in information. And if you're someone like me who likes a challenge, you're not scared of a challenge, and if you also like to learn new things, working in technology, working in information, there are constantly new tools to analyze different problems or to extract insights from data. So you're constantly learning, you're constantly kind of trying to stay ahead of the curve in a field like information. So yeah, I would just say if you're considering it, go for it. It's definitely challenging, it's very rewarding, but I have not regretted being in the information field since I started. So yeah, that's my spiel.
That was great. Well, thank you so much. So unfortunately, because you have to leave, I believe, a little early, you may not be able to stay for questions at the end. So if anyone has any questions for Nekabari Siagalo, just send an email or put it in the chat, and we will get it to her. And I hope that I can speak for you, that you'll respond somehow to the people who ask the questions.
Absolutely, I sure will.
Okay, thank you. That was really wonderful, and I think the resonance of the passion you have and the way that you're stuck with health and really staying with that is just an example of like information having such a powerful impact. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is a project scientist and assistant professor at the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the University of Maryland's Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science. And this is Maria Molina. Maria, welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. And I actually have a few slides to use just as visual aids. I am a visual learner, so I really appreciate, I always try to use visual aids when I speak. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. And can you see this in full screen?
Yep.
There should be a word cloud.
Yeah.
Great. And so hello, everybody. As you were just told, I am currently a project scientist, which is essentially just someone that conducts research at the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. And the acronym is NCAR. So here you can see that big acronym there in the word cloud. And I am also an incoming faculty member. So I'll be an assistant professor starting in just a few weeks at the University of Maryland within the Department of Atmospheric and Oceanic Science. And I'll remain affiliated with NCAR as well. So I'll still visit out here in Boulder, Colorado, and work with my colleagues at times during the summers and anytime I have time off. I was originally born in Nicaragua and immigrated with my family when I was about 1 year old, and grew up in the state of Florida. And the state of Florida has lots of extreme weather events. and of course is just one of many places that is impacted by climate change, things like sea level rise, flooding, also extreme events such as tropical cyclones or hurricanes are real threats out there. And I still have my parents in South Florida, so I'm constantly warning them about these sorts of things. But my career path was actually quite windy. This was not a very straightforward path to get to where I am. Initially, going through extreme weather events in Florida, that really sparked a curiosity for extreme weather in me. And that actually stuck with me until I went to pursue my undergraduate degree in meteorology. And I specifically went to Florida State University, mainly because they have a really large meteorology program, the largest in the state at the time. And my mom said I was going to stay in-state for in-state tuition. But that really sparked an interest also in the communication of extreme events. And so the dissemination of this information to the public, right? Like, what can you expect during an extreme weather event? How can you stay safe? What should you do to prepare? And how can you best protect your property? So those sorts of questions were really interesting to me. And I actually became a broadcast meteorologist for about 6 years in New York City, following my undergraduate degree completion. But during that time, as a broadcast meteorologist, I also noticed that there were consistently records being set. The discussion around climate change is very polarized still to this day. And I was really interested in climate and felt like I didn't know enough about it to be able to speak about it or disseminate information about it well. And so I actually went back to graduate school to pursue a degree in climate and society. So that intersection between climate change, climate variability, how these large scale signals within the Earth system impact local weather, and the intersection or the impact that has to society, right? How does that impact humans at the end of the day? And eventually that led me down a path to where I realized that I really enjoy digging down deep into data and staying with questions for a long period of time. And so ultimately I left broadcast meteorology, so left the dissemination of this very high frequency daily weather events and the dissemination of that information to the public for a career where I was the one diving deep into questions and asking questions of data and looking at information before eventually then sharing it with the public. And I really enjoy the space that I am in now. And then ultimately ended up at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, where I am now. And I'm absolutely thrilled to start soon as a faculty member at the University of Maryland to empower others to be able to ask questions of data and extract very useful and important information from these large data sets that we have for climate. And so there was, I'll kind of hit some key points throughout that wavy path. The big weather event for me that was a big catalyst for my interest in extreme weather events was Hurricane Andrew. This occurred way back in 1992. It was a Category 5 hurricane. And during the time that we went through the storm as a family, my parents had never been through a hurricane, right? We were originally from Nicaragua. There are not really very strong hurricanes that impact that region, so they didn't really know what to expect. And so one of the most vivid memories I have as a child is looking to my parents during this incoming event and seeing fear in their faces and not really knowing what to expect, right? So that lack of information, that lack of experience was really scary, and that really impacted me and my future. And so again, became a broadcast meteorologist, disseminating a lot of this important information and helping others to understand what they could expect. And that led me to experience all kinds of extreme weather events. And in fact, here, this photo is that of a snowstorm in Buffalo, New York, back in 2014. And this was a historic lake effect snowstorm where over 5 feet of snow ended up accumulating over a period of a few days. And so again, just try to imagine 5 feet of snow. Like, I am about 5 feet 5'1". So that was really, really scary and just a major event So these extreme weather events can happen across a full spectrum, as I'm sure you already know, from anywhere from tropical weather to thunderstorms, flash floods, snowstorms, and how these events are changing is also really important to understand. But to build trust with an audience in the dissemination of this important information, oftentimes we need to first develop trust with that audience, right? So if I'm going to tell someone that some very extreme weather event is going to occur, hopefully there was some sort of relationship established before that day so that they can trust me and receive that information more willingly, or at least view it from a trustworthy source. And so in our news station, we would also do some fun pieces. And so I'll share a quick little clip of me flying with the Blue Angels. This was years ago. But the point of this was to kind of, establish a relationship with the public at home and do fun pieces so that when the weather is good, they get to see another side of the person. And then eventually that person, when things are really bad, can disseminate that information that's so important. They're not always receiving bad news from me. And so, yes, I did pass out when I flew with the Blue Angels, but again, highlighting that it's, this information, as we're sharing it with the public, we can have fun some days, and then other days we really need to get into very serious topics. And so now I work on machine learning applications for climate. What got me really interested in the use of machine learning tools or even deep learning, so very large neural networks, is this idea that we have so much data for climate, right? So we have these climate simulations that span thousands of years. We have so many different types of observations that are these pinpoint at these pinpoint locations and have themselves some biases. We have information from satellites. So again, there's a wealth of information, and being able to extract information from that is really important. And so these acronyms here really mean subseasonal to seasonal prediction, or subseasonal or seasonal to decadal prediction. So we're thinking about predicting extreme events out to several years. And also understanding how the climate system varies and impacts local weather or local phenomena at different scales. And so I guess the closing thoughts here, as far as we were asked to share some thoughts or some potential advice, it really just have two slides. So my first thing is really to focus on what is important to you. Right. So to me, it's been this extreme weather and climate and understanding that information and sharing it with the public. And that's really driven me in my career. And I would say, that may not drive you, but there may be a different type of interest that drives you, and that can really motivate you and be a big catalyst for your own career. And I'll also add that something I've learned throughout my own career is to be open to different directions in my career path. So for example, when I was, going through my undergraduate degree, I thought, I just want to be a broadcast meteorologist. And once I was doing that, I was like, okay, I'm done. But then these new ideas started popping in my head and new directions that I wanted to take with my life. And I realized, hey, things can change. My own perspectives on what I would like to achieve with my life can change. And so just want to share that with you all. And of course, it's much easier said than done. It was very scary making a big career change, but it can be well worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was really great. And I think I just would say to add that you clearly also have a continuing interest in continuing to learn, because as you proceeded in your career, you realized how much more there was to know, and you went for it. So that was great. So thank you, and thanks for staying on. And if you have questions for Maria Molina, just be prepared to ask them when we come to the end of the presentations. So thank you. Next up is, he's a UX researcher at IBM, and this Stephen Castellucci, you're up.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for having me. So I earned a PhD in computer science, specializing in human-computer interaction from York University here in Toronto, Canada, where I am now. During my time in academia, I realized my passion for helping others achieve their goals. Students often have the goal of learning a particular subject matter that aligns with their career aspirations. And it's really rewarding to see that aha moment where someone understands a complex topic thanks to your presentation of it. And I taught as a professor at York on a 3-year contract before I realized that I wanted to transition to a career in industry where there were more opportunities. So I worked at Amazon as a software development engineer on the team responsible for case management. You might be wondering, what is case management? Every time someone contacts Amazon with a question or concern, whether that be via chat, email, or phone, at the time, I think we were just wrapping up the contacts via fax, would you believe? So anytime that happens, the system creates a case. And our team was responsible for creating and storing those cases, retrieving cases for customer service reps to review and update them, and also deleting cases when required. And something that was both really empowering and also intimidating at first was that even though we were based in Toronto, we were responsible for the information of all customer cases globally. So this included designing or redesigning the system architecture and information architecture of the data as necessary. And so I remember setting up a database one time and migrating the information. And once it's set up, it's usually an automated process, but I couldn't help myself just staring at the records being moved and the progress being made and realizing, I'm having a positive impact on how we handle the data of millions and millions, if not billions, of customers worldwide. And so it's a wonderful opportunity, but it's quite the responsibility. As you've probably heard, with great power comes great responsibility, and so we had a lot of responsibility to our customers at the time. But the wonderful thing there that I really enjoyed was that I was helping people achieve their goal of, getting books for relaxation, or a new gaming console for entertainment, or any number of items to help in their everyday lives. In January of this year, I joined IBM Security as a user experience researcher. And that was one of the benefits there, is that I was able to leverage my expertise in both HCI research and computer science. So IBM provides products and services to help companies and organizations protect their information, whether that be trade secrets or customer data. And computer security itself is very complex. And security products are also complex, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be difficult to use. And we want to make it as easy as possible to use, so that our users don't have to worry about using the product. They can just accomplish their goals, deal with the information that they need to, and complete their tasks. So what we do is we essentially, by learning about our users, their responsibilities, their daily tasks, and their difficulties, something that we call pain points, we can better design our solutions to address their needs and their desired outcomes, their goals, essentially. And so what IBM does is we focus on the user outcomes, and that's at the heart of what IBM calls enterprise design thinking. So there are a lot of design thinking or design focused frameworks. IBM has their own, so it's called enterprise design thinking. And while most design frameworks employ a circular pattern of iteration, IBM uses a loop sort of shaped like the infinity symbol with 3 stages. So there is observe, reflect, and make. And so first you essentially observe your users to learn their needs, and then you reflect on how you can improve their situation. Then you make a solution, but then you loop back to reflect to see how you can evaluate the efficacy of your solution. You then observe users using your solution and reflect on improvements. And so the process repeats. And so it's a continual process of iteration and improvement as the solution progresses and evolves. And so it's wonderful to be able to help companies protect their information, because yes, it certainly helps IBM's bottom line, but these companies that are our clients, they also have clients, and these could be big companies or agencies or organizations, and that could be handling my data or your friends or family's data or your neighbor's data. And so again, it's wonderful to feel that I have this ability to have a positive influence on how that data is protected. Going back to the enterprise design thinking of IBM, most companies will have a set methodology that they follow, and one isn't necessarily better than the other. But if you do decide to use information to help design solutions, I do encourage you to be able to adapt to whichever methodology you encounter, because if you go to one organization or company, they might have their own methodology that they've been working on for some time, which is great. And initially, you just have to sort of adapt to their methodology and their way of conducting research and using information, but then also see how you can impact and update, change, or influence in a positive way their methodology, so that even the methodology itself is continually being improved and iterated upon. And one of the rewarding parts of having taught in university and then going into industry is that at both Amazon and IBM, I've had the privilege of meeting and reconnecting with former students. And so walking along the halls and you see someone just sort of turn and look and sort of point and come up to me and say, I'm sorry, were you a professor at York? I said, yes, I was in your class. So it's great having that connection. And despite the different paths in my career, the constant is gathering, sharing, and protecting information to help others achieve their goals. And whichever path you take in your information career, I hope that you find it both challenging and rewarding. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering your questions later on.
Thank you so much. That was just tremendous. And the helping theme was really a strong one in your talk. Next up, we have someone who is the Senior Program Officer in the Office of Library Services in the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This is James Neal. Mr. Neal?
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone, and hello to the students. I'm so happy to be able to have this opportunity to share with you a little bit about my path and my passion with libraries in particular. In 2008, I was living out in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was a traveling sales rep or a publisher's rep for a college textbook publisher. I would go to various colleges and universities to try to convince professors at the universities and colleges to adopt the textbooks that my company was publishing. In 2008, the economy began a downturn, and there was what was called the Global Recession. I lost my job. And it was at that time that I thought about many things that I had thought about before regarding my own life and career and what I was really passionate about and what I really wanted to do. And I decided that I would like to pursue a library and information science degree. Well, I applied to the University of Maryland, as well as a few other schools, but I entered the University of Maryland in 2010 and finished with an MLS degree in 2012. When I graduated from Maryland in 2012, the economy was still very, very shaky. It took me about 2 years to land a full-time job within a library. And it was not my first choice of jobs. It was something I had never even considered. But I had done some teaching in my previous life early on in my career. And my resume had that full-time substitute teaching position listed. And I was called by the Prince George's County Library System in Maryland. And the woman basically gave me a phone interview on the spot. She said, Mr. Neal, your resume is very impressive. We see that you've done some full-time substitute teaching. have you ever considered being a youth services or children's librarian? And I said, oh no, I'm interested in digital collections and digital humanities and technology and data and software. She said, well, perhaps you should consider being a youth services or a children's librarian in the Prince George's County. And I took that job, and it turned out to be one of the best things that ever happened to me. It was a real strong basis of learning how communities operate and learning what communities need when it comes to information resources, be that books, electronic resources, access to the internet, and the like. And I maintained a position as a youth services or children's librarian for about a year at Prince George's County. And the administration recognized my penchant for and interest in technology and digital services. So they asked me to become the director of digital services for the entire library system in the county of Prince George's in Maryland. And in that capacity, I spent a lot of time assisting a web developer, developing our website, developing electronic resources, providing interface for the website. Also, I spent a great deal of time helping a lot of people who were interested in ebooks and were having troubles accessing ebooks via the Overdrive application, or trying to find ways to maximize library borrowing of ebooks through their Kindle. So that job was a real interesting job when it came to what I'm doing now. I am working for what's known as the Institute of Museum and Library Services, more commonly known as the IMLS. And the IMLS is located in Washington, D.C. It is a federal agency, meaning it's a part of the federal government. And we are the primary funders for libraries, archives, and museums across the United States, its freely associated states, and territories. So that means all of the 50 United States, including Alaska and Hawaii, as well as places like Puerto Rico, Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. In my capacity as a program officer, I work in what's known as the Discretionary Grants Program. These are competitive grants. The way that the IMLS is structured in its library services is that there are two main offices. There's one office known as Grants to States. In that office, this office is responsible for managing and monitoring the allocation of federal funding for state libraries across the United States. Each library or each state in the United States has a state library, and they all vary in size, they all vary in capacity, and they all vary in focus and service and delivery to libraries in their communities. I work in what's known as the Office of Library Services Discretionary. Again, I use that word discretionary and competitive, meaning that people who are interested in applying for funds from iSchools, from colleges and universities, from actual public libraries themselves, they apply to IMLS with project designs based on inquiry of services or resources to be deployed or implemented, as well as trying to meet community needs. The areas that I cover are the domains, or what they call my portfolio at IMLS, include the following areas, and they tie very much back to my role in digital services at Prince George's County. So one of the things that I work on the most, and that has become of real importance during the pandemic, is what's known as digital inclusion and digital equity. There are a lot of people in the United States, particularly in rural areas and even in suburban and urban areas, who don't have access to the internet. That's due to availability, that's due to affordability, That's also due to a personal choice of perhaps not adopting the internet, because we all know the internet comes with a great deal of gifts, but also a lot of potential quagmires. So another part of my job is I also focus on the role of data privacy and security and how that intersects with libraries. When you go online, you have to be very, very careful about what type of information you share regarding your personal life, where you live, your health, your economic situation, your family life. And there are many people who don't really realize how much you're being surveilled when you're on the internet. There are folks out there who are very eager to get your data because that data becomes useful for all sorts of beneficial activities, but nefarious activities as well. So we focus on the ways in which libraries can assist patrons, library users, to have what's known as digital literacy or digital skills training, so that they are aware of privacy issues and also that they're aware of how to use the internet to do a number of things. As we all know, most business, most education, and a lot of entertainment is transacted online. And not everyone is very knowledgeable of how to use the internet. So librarians have a very unique role of being digital literacy or digital skills experts, and they can be digital navigators to assist those who need help using the internet. I also work in an area known as open educational resources. That's OER. The cost of textbooks and the cost of instructional materials, especially in the higher education scenario or arena, can be very expensive. There's been a movement over the past several decades to try to lower the cost and lower the barriers that exist to access to information. So there's a movement known as open educational resources that academic libraries, that means libraries at colleges and universities and community colleges, participate in trying to find ways that students can access and procure instructional material and curriculum that is low cost and often free. I also work in an area known as ebooks. I mentioned ebooks earlier. Most library systems in the public library arena offer some form of ebook borrowing and lending. It's a very tricky marketplace in that there are several competing arms and technologies that are used, and the way that things are being done now is still very much a changing marketplace. So we try to assist libraries that are interested in maximizing how ebooks are loaned and borrowed throughout the United States. And finally, one area that I also work in at IMLS is known as what is called civic or public interest technology. This is used, excuse me, excuse me. Public interest or civic technology involves the use of certain phenomena like open data, community data that is readily available for the public to use. Things such as transit information. When is the metro showing up? Where is a metro station? Community and public safety information. Where is the nearest police station? Where is the nearest hospital or health provider? So libraries have a role in their communities of being able to provide access to information regarding data and knowledge of these services related to things that we use in our various communities. So I really strongly encourage you to don't be too set in your career paths, because things do change. The economy often will fluctuate, and what you should do is pursue what you feel is your passion. And I also want to very much emphasize that a large part of my interest and passion in public libraries and in service to the federal government is exactly that. Public service is very important. Serve your community, care for one another and your fellow human. Thank you.
That was very inspirational. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I'm sure the students will have lots of questions to follow up on that when we get to the end of the presentations. Our next speaker, our penultimate speaker, is production engineer at Meta. It's Dan Forrest, and Dan, can give it off to you.
Hi, and thanks for having me here today. All right, so I'll try to follow the plan and talk about my path first. So I have been interested in information from, I think, a slightly different angle from what we've heard so far, because I started more on a very technical path. So my role is software engineering heavy, basically, and it's been like that for a long time. I started when I was a teenager. I was lucky enough to have grown up around computers, which commonplace nowadays, but in the 90s, not everybody had one or had the internet for that matters. And yeah, so when I was 14, I started digging deeper and I started programming. So I just built fun stuff on calculators on my own computer, scripting things, like really like silly toys, but also like some small games and other stuff. And that interest developed later on. I went on to get a master's in math, computer science, and computational techniques in engineering. So that's numerical simulation of physical phenomena, for example, for engineering needs. And then both during my years in engineering school and afterwards, I had some contracting and internship experience. So I did a lot of web development, mobile development at the time. It was pretty early, like iPhone 3, 4. Early smartwatch prototypes. And then I got into more data-oriented things, which I found more interesting because they had a lot more depth, in my opinion. I think that's not true, but it's just a different type of depth. And I worked on a classifieds website where I built a search engine classification system to gear people towards the right category when they search for something. So when you look for a boat, you get boats and not books about boats. So that was basic statistical machine learning. And then I worked in scam and fraud detection on the same system using graph-oriented algorithms. So like detecting communities, which is something used in social networks, but also useful for fraud detection and linking data together. Later on, I worked on a social network and search engine for open access scientific publications. So that's scientific publications often are behind paid access, and so that's publications you can get access to without paying for and without paying royalties, but in legal fashion. And so I built a system to crawl the different repositories that exist, gather terabytes, like dozens of terabytes of PDFs, and then process them and make them searchable and accessible. And the idea here was to make it as easy as possible to find the information you want, make it a seamless experience for everyone who wants to learn about scientific research that's available in some areas. Later on, I worked on at a different company on live data systems. So that's a bit more low level. I'm not going to go into details, but it was helping a lot of people on how to use systems properly, how to structure their data, how to meet their goals to build a specific application that was facing a lot of people on the internet, and how to make it robust, because when you operate at scale, it is easy to have failures and lots of types of problems. And I'll go more into details to what I do today at Meta. So Meta is the company behind Facebook, WhatsApp, Oculus, Instagram, and a bunch of other things. You are probably aware that all those things require lots of computers to serve your request. When you post a message, when you post a picture, these have to be stored somewhere. And so Meta has millions of those computers. And what that means is that when you have a very low, imagine you have a 1% chance of a computer breaking. When you have a million computers, that means you have 10,000 computers breaking at that moment. And if it's over a week, then it means they always have a lot of stuff breaking. And what we don't want is that when you send a message to someone, it gets stored on the computer, then the computer breaks and you can't see that message. Or when you post your cat picture in the evening, it disappeared the next day. That's not what you expect when you use the services. We're trying to avoid unpleasant situations by building systems that gather telemetry. So it is measurement of what is happening on the hosts and its components, host being a machine here. Sorry, interrupt me if I dig into technical terms. On those millions of machines all the time to make sure that when something happens that is possibly upsetting to our internal systems, but also would end up being visible outside, we catch that, and then we, one, we remove the machine that is broken, and two, we make sure that it is acted upon. So sometimes it's like the classic restart the machine, it works. It's still not a dead technique. And sometimes someone has to go and look at it. So we try to automatically describe what to do so that people spend as little time as possible doing that. And why that may seem a bit trivial, like the quantities of information you have to manage is insane, because you cannot, like, I cannot stop looking at those machines at night. Like, I cannot stop at any moment. So I'm always looking every minute at a lot of things on all those machines. And so it means you have immense quantities of information that you have to process, you have to gather, you have to structure as well, because if it is not structured, you run into a lot of interesting problems. Something I also learned during my previous experience of open access, because you have a lot of information that is inputted by humans. And so you might have this perfect ideal of like every paper has a title and the field is named title and the title is the title, but sometimes the field is called name and it has the name of the author instead of the name of the paper, that kind of things. And so when you learn to deal with things that are big, both in terms of complexity and in terms of having been made by humans, like the computers, they're machines, they just do what they're told. But what they're told is built by humans. So sometimes there are bugs in there. Sometimes the thing that tells me it's broken is not actually broken. Sometimes the thing that tells me it's healthy is not healthy. So you have to be able to sift through those large quantities of information to, well, find the grain in the chat, find the nuggets of information that matter, and that applies to all my past experiences as well. Sometimes it's very manual, and sometimes you can automate it using nice toolings. But I guess sorry, I'm getting a bit long, so I'll move on to the general passion. I guess the passion I have is it's general curiosity driven. It's like, get to the truth of thing, get to the root cause of why something is, even if it's unpleasant. Sometimes the root cause is I made a mistake. But sometimes it's just trying to understand how the world works and try to understand what assumptions led to a problem happening, because a lot of things we say human errors are something that someone thought they understood or knew, and it actually applied in one context, but not in another. And it turns out they were not in the right context when they had that knowledge that they thought they had. And so it's like senior engineering on large system is at the intersection of software engineering, data science, and just psychology in certain areas where you have to just try to see a piece of data or a piece of logic and try to deduct how something got there and why people did that. Anyway, so I try to discover and understand truth and simplify a lot of things for others to be able to work on complex systems without trying to hold all those things in their mind. I guess I'll move on to inspiring-ish. I would say overall, like, data and software engineering is pervasive in this world. Everything is driven by software and data. So it is worth it to understand how the world works. There's this quote of software is eating the world, and that's actually true. Like even your computer, even the most simple component in your computer, even your CPU has a tiny bit of software in it that like makes it tick the right way. So I think it is important, an important part of education to know what's happening behind the scenes. I also think that it doesn't always have to be vocational. So I love that I went through a master's, and I don't regret that. And it provided me with a super solid foundation that enables me to build stuff without having to rediscover or rethink through things that have already been studied and understood. But I think the bigger takeaway from education in theory is that it's a toolbox. It's good to have a starting set, but at some point you have to be active. And that means that even if you're sitting in class, or if you decide to not sit in class, you have to be active and think about things, ask questions, read your own books, do your own experiments. And that's also one of the genuinely great aspects of software and data and information nowadays. It's all virtual. It is virtually cost-free if you already have a computer to experiment on a lot of things. There are limitations to doing it on a single computer, but you can build words from nothing. That's a very unique thing in this field that you should all leverage if you're interested in it. Yeah, that's about it.
That was great. Thank you, Dan. And I both your talk, but also everybody's. It's really interesting how there's different paths that you all have taken. And so I'm really looking forward to the questions to you that are coming actually after the next presenter. And that next presenter is a professor at the University of Maryland. That's a beautiful dog in that picture. And her name is Jen Goldbeck. Jen, thank you for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. So yeah, I'm Jen Goldbeck. I'm a computer scientist. I got my PhD at the University of Maryland in computer science, and then came over to the College of Information Studies as a professor. I've been here for a really long time. I did my PhD here, and then haven't taken another job, so I haven't moved around a lot. But yeah, I feel like I'm one of those people who's interested in trying like a whole bunch of things, and that has definitely played out throughout my career. So I study artificial intelligence, particularly applied to social networks and social media. I did a lot of the initial work on how do you figure out stuff about people by analyzing what they put online, which, now is a thing that's just kind of done in really creepy ways all the time. It has made me kind of a privacy advocate, which is not a thing that I was before. But I've constantly underestimated the bad stuff that people could do with the scientific things that I have discovered. And so it's made me really come out and advocate for that thing to be better. I have not really succeeded yet. It's still pretty bad, but I'm hoping, and I keep pushing, and it's a thing that's become really important to me. I also study bad stuff on the internet. So my PhD was really focused on algorithms, and I still do a lot of that work. But the nice thing about working in information studies, which is a very interdisciplinary field, is that we have the freedom to really expand out from one very tiny focused thing to touch a lot of the things around that. And so for me, my original motivation when I started working in this space was to help people connect with information that they trust online. And in a kind of naive way that was appropriate to the time, I thought that was like finding movies that you like, or, maybe if you've got a bunch of people reviewing a restaurant, like which reviews are useful. And that's of course still a thing that we need. But it turns out that there have been people on social media putting more and more really bad stuff for a broad definition of bad out there, that I have gotten interested in, partially in studying and partially just kind of keeping my thumb on the pulse of that. So I do research on things like online harassment, the alt-right, neo-Nazis, all kinds of bad things, bots, Russian influence over elections. I kind of infiltrate, secretly spy on those spaces, and then come talk about it, sometimes in the research, but also in a more public way. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. That's kind of hard work to do sometimes. You see a lot of really terrible things in there. I think especially if you're not a terrible person, which I consider myself to be not a terrible person, you don't understand just how bad it gets in some of those spaces until you kind of infiltrate them and spy on them and see what's going on, which is nothing like the stuff that you see in your normal life. kind of in line with that. So, as I was developing this research plan and these research interests, I also have been incredibly active on social media, like since before it was a thing. I started doing my PhD in 2001. So Facebook didn't exist then. Nothing that you use now existed then. And I kind of had this idea of like, maybe a social network on the web would be interesting, just as people were starting to try that out. So I've really been enmeshed in that space since it started. I love using social media. Even though I look at all this bad stuff that people do there, I'm also really good at using it. And that has played out for a bunch of interesting ways in my career as well. So just like on the professional side, as someone who's like a spy on bad people online, I then will go on to Twitter and be like, so you want to know what the bad people are doing online? Let me tell you what they're doing. Here's some screenshots of stuff that they're saying. Here's like the general tone of that discussion. And the fact is, most people don't want to go into those spaces. They don't really even know where to find them. They're not sure how to interpret what's going on there. So kind of being this guide to this scary internet place is a really useful thing right now. And that's a thing that has kind of opened a path for me of what we in academia would call public intellectual work. And it basically means like talking to reporters and telling them about stuff that's going on as someone who has some expertise in that space. So I do a lot of TV, a lot of radio, newspaper, online kind of reporting, interviews, as the kind of go-to person you can talk to of like, hey, I hear this thing's happening with QAnon, or like this alt-right militia is talking about having a demonstration here. Like, what are they actually planning? And it's different than academic research where I'm like, here's an algorithm that can do this thing. And like, I prove it and I do statistics and, I still do that work and I like it. But I also have a real track of my career that's that person kind of taking a research perspective on what's going on and then finding a way to talk to the general public about that. So that's a kind of media side of it. And then it gets overwhelming doing all of this stuff related to what people are doing online that's bad. And frankly, also going on TV as a woman, every time I go on MSNBC, my husband like has it on in the other room and I come out and I was like, okay, let's see what bad stuff people said about me on Twitter. Making fun of my hair, making fun of my makeup, whatever, right? That's just sort of like a normal part of doing it and it sucks. And at some point I was like, I need a corner of the internet that's not going to suck. And I can't find it. And so I made it for myself. I have six golden retrievers. My husband and I rescue special medical needs golden retrievers. So we have a kind of island of misfit toys of like hospice dogs and seniors that nobody wants and dogs that are broken and we're going to get put down and we take them and fix them up. And so we started putting pictures of them online. They're the golden ratio 4. They're on every platform that you use. And they've kind of become a big thing. So we have, 150,000 followers on Twitter, probably 120 on Instagram, 700,000 on Snapchat. So it's a big thing. We could probably like live off of the income from that if we wanted to. I mean, it's a small portion of like what we do, but if we were like, we don't want to do anything else anymore, we're just going to post pictures of our dogs online, like there's enough there that we can do that. And of course that connects in with the research that I do, right? Understanding how social media platforms work. So I teach a class now at the University of Maryland for undergrads, if you're thinking about applying here, called Becoming a Social Media Influencer. It's a really hands-on class that teaches you like how to set up an account, what it means to make interesting content, how you use the tools to do that, understanding analytics, the kind of secrets of understanding the algorithms to grow yourself a very big account. And it's a lot of work to do that, but it works every time. Anytime the students come into the class and they just do the exact stuff I tell them to do, they end up with big popular accounts at the end, which is pretty fun. One of my students has a TikTok account called Ghostly Archive. She was interning at Congressional Cemetery and was taking my class. She has gone viral a bunch of times, and you've probably seen her in the New York Times or the Washington Post, all over the place, where she makes recipes that people have had inscribed on their headstones. So I guess the recipes that they literally took to the grave, she has a TikTok where she cooks those recipes, and has 50,000 followers on TikTok, and people send her gifts and free vacations and haunted Airbnbs. And that's the kind of stuff that for me is like a really fun side of what can often be a sort of dark space of looking at things online, that we can also take social media and I can teach you how to use it and do it well. I do that myself and I really enjoy it. And it integrates that understanding of these algorithms, which I help build and that I know how they work, to then let us use that for things that empower us. So that's a kind of quick, broad picture of the space I like to play in. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions about that, because I think it's question time now, right, Andy?
What a strong finish to the presentation. So that there's like a million questions I have for everybody. But this is your time, students. So I want to ask you to put your hand up in the reactions area. I think that's probably the easiest way for me to call on people. So if you have a question, you can ask a question for all of the panelists, or you can ask a question for an individual panelist. Hopefully you were kind of taking notes on some things you were thinking about as each of the presenters spoke. And you certainly got a wide range of kind of topic themes and also areas to pursue in questions. So let me throw it to you all. I'm looking, I don't see any hands up yet. Any other questions? Actually, and also questions of me about like how to ask questions. But you all did a really great job in doing your information challenge this week. So this is your time to ask questions of these panelists. Finn, I see you, your hand up. So you've got the first question. Tell us who actually introduce yourself and also who your question is to. And thanks, Finn. Also, obviously, unmute yourself.
Hi, I'm Finn Gallagher. What was it like when you flew in the blue with the Blue Angels?
From Maria Molina.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, that was a top 10 life experience there. So the Blue Angels, they fly these F-18 jets. I think it's 18. I know there's other types, but not an expert here on this topic. But and so they travel around the country and perform these acrobatic shows or with their jets, for those of you that have not seen them. So what that experience was like was they thought it would be really funny to try to make me throw up and pass out on the jet. And in the seat that I was in, so it's a 2-seater jet, I'm in the back seat. They actually have little baggies that you can grab if that happens. And it did happen to me. So as you saw, I passed out and got sick quite a few times, but it was still epic. Got to, do all kinds of maneuvers, and my big objective was to break the speed of sound, and so we got to do that, which was surprisingly anticlimactic. But I would say, the objective of that story was, it's anticlimactic if you're in the jet, because you're moving with the jet, so you don't really notice how fast you're going. But yeah, and I guess the point of that was to, share the information about, what they do. And at the time, I think there were budget issues, and then they were allowed to go back and perform. And so that was really the information we were sharing. But from selfish perspective, that was awesome. However, when I look back on it now, I cringe because of the climate imprint. Not good. But anyway, yeah. So that was what that was like. I hope I answered your question okay. Thanks for the question.
Great question, Finn. And I don't see any other hands up right now. So I'm going to give you, so actually I see a question in the chat. Emmanuel Kujenda, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Since my mic isn't working, let's see. I'll type my question for Jen here. Since you said you've done some digging in alt-right spaces online, how do you think the internet and social media have affected the voices of those kinds of people? Thanks for your question.
That's such a good question. I kind of have a two-part view of social media for that kind of thing. Because on one hand, social media has really been transformative for social justice movements. It has given a voice to traditionally oppressed communities who do not have their voices covered in, say, what you would have seen in the mainstream media in the 1980s, right? You look at Ferguson, and what you would have seen covered on the news without social media is a bunch of Black people are rioting in Ferguson and the police are trying to restore order at the end. And what we had at the time was Twitter, where people were sharing lots of videos of what was going on that could tell a very different story than the official story. And if you talk to DeRay, who's one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement and who's very involved in Ferguson, you know, he really pushes this line that's like, whatever you have to say about Twitter, like Twitter saved people's lives in Ferguson because you were able to film that. And, you know, and I think we've seen that consistently since then with a lot of social justice movements. And certainly, you know, the George Floyd situation is one where we wouldn't have had that information without social media, and we wouldn't have had all of the response to that without it. So social media on one hand can be incredibly powerful for social justice and giving voices to people that a kind of gatekept media wouldn't have done. On the other hand, you're exactly right. It has given certainly more visibility to the alt-right movement. I have a TED talk specifically about QAnon that I think came out last fall. So it's only like 6 months old, where I really kind of dig into this if you want more details. But I would say the short answer is, yeah, I mean, we see a lot more of it now. See, you know, since people have been getting online, the alt-right, especially kind of like the neo-Nazi movement, the militia movement, have actively been using these kinds of spaces. So it's nothing new. I mean, they were on Usenet, you know, back before you had a graphical user interface. They were on chat boards in the 1990s on AOL, right? They have always been there and using this kind of technology. But I think an interesting thing that we've seen, you know, in the last few years is the platforms themselves have given a path of radicalization to a kind of average person. And it's been interesting for me to watch, because when I mentioned before, I started my PhD in 2001. So a lot of the work that I did studying social networks then was focused on terrorism, because that's where the research funding was after September 11th, was on looking at like, how are people radicalized online into these terrorist groups overseas? And exactly the stuff that we were studying then is the stuff that we look at now in the US with like white supremacist, alt-right, Christian nationalist kind of move. It's exactly the same thing. And QAnon was an example of that, where we had this kind of confluence of the alt-right doing the same thing they had always done. And suddenly, like with a lot of people having time on their hands and the pandemic and people learning to use YouTube, and then the algorithms on sites like Facebook kind of pushing people towards these more extreme groups because they're more engaging to people. We kind of saw an algorithmic radicalization of people that gave a lot more power to those groups than they had before. For me, there's a real question of like, were these people actually radicalized? Or were they really that bad in the first place, and now they just feel like they can say it a little bit louder? I want it to be that they were radicalized, because that means that there's hope that we can bring them back. That may be slightly naive. I don't know. I got to learn some more psychology before I answer that. But yeah, you know, social media allows the voices of everybody to be magnified. I think an unfortunate thing, to speak directly to your question, Emmanuel, is that the social media platforms have learned that pushing people towards extremes, and particularly towards the alt-right, I mean, we see it on both sides, but we see this really manifest on the alt-right, that creates more engagement, and that makes them more money. And they will recognize internally that we're pushing people towards these really extreme violent groups. and then explicitly choose not to do anything about it because it will cost them money. And it's only taken some really aggressive public outcry to even get their internal rules enforced against that. That's really troubling for me. I don't know what the solution is to it. And that, there's a whole other hour of conversation there. But yeah, I mean, I think your point that social media is giving the alt-right these voices and a recruiting platform is absolutely true. But it's not enough for me to totally write it off, because there is also a lot of really good that comes out of the voices that social media can amplify.
So fantastic questions, and Emmanuel and Finn kind of modeled two different ways you can ask your question. I don't see anybody in the on deck circle, so I'm going to just ask a question of all the panelists. We have a question for everybody. It's Basia K. This is for everyone. You all seem to specialize in a certain area. What specializations do you think are becoming more popular, and which ones are becoming more necessary? And I think, Mr. Neal, I wanted to start with you, and then we'll just kind of work our way through the panelists.
Yes, thank you so much, Andy. I think it's really important to recognize what Jen Goldbeck mentioned about her interest in privacy. Privacy touches so many different areas of our lives, and there's more than that's just going on with technology, but there's also a fundamental legal framework as well as a technological aspect as well. I think one of the most important things that can be done is for there to be much more enlightenment about how your data is being used in society. If you're a user of social media, if you're a user of a smartphone or apps on your smartphone, there's data being collected about you, and sometimes it's not in the most positive ways. So I think that data privacy and security is of extreme importance, and there's a great deal of work to be done from a number of different perspectives. The United States is in the process of trying to formalize and codify a legal framework that will go towards greater data and privacy and security. There's also the realm of cybersecurity in itself, which we all know is a real hot field as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan Forrest, put you up next.
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that in a precise fashion, because I don't think there's I think the specialization that works the best and that will become more necessary is understanding biases that we all have and thinking about things in as objective terms as we can, which is hard. I think it's really hard for everyone to do that. But that's also why data analysis is interesting. I think like the same numbers can tell different things depending on who interprets them and how, like what narrative they lay on the numbers. And finding ways to interpret the numbers yourself and to provide like the tools to others to interpret them is probably what matters the most, in my opinion.
Great answer. Thank you. Dan, Stephen Castellucci.
Thank you. Yeah. Just to echo what James Neal and Jen Goldbeck were saying, companies are capturing a lot of our data, again, for both beneficial and nefarious purposes. And so I think it's just important for people to learn and understand how their data is being gathered, or in some cases learning that their data is being gathered, because that isn't always transparent, how it's being used, how it's being stored, how it's being handled, and giving control to the individuals. I know that there's legislation both in the States and Brazil and then EU implementing the right to be forgotten, and so that ability to control how your data is being used by companies, and limiting what data the companies gather is one step. But as James Neal was saying, cybersecurity is another aspect. And so I think it's important to ensure that the companies who do have our data have the tools that they need to protect it and are held accountable for protecting our data.
Great, thank you so much. Melina.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'll say, you know, from my side of things in atmospheric science, I think a topic that's becoming more popular, at least in my opinion, is Earth system prediction and this idea of extending predictions out to several weeks. So this idea of subseasonal prediction, where we could potentially provide you know, city planners, or let's say a water resource manager, with information regarding what precipitation anomalies may look like in the coming weeks, right? So that would be really important for communities. And it seems to be growing more popular throughout numerous sectors. And I would say, as far as what's becoming more necessary, certainly climate science, and also specifically environmental justice. And so the idea that that extreme weather events and climate change won't impact everyone equally, right? We know that we have communities that are underserved, and some of these communities will not be able to adapt to the changes that we're seeing. They won't be able to bounce back from extreme weather events as quickly. And likewise, also, I think Dan mentioned the idea of biases in our data, and that exists as well when we think about observations. So not all places have high quality weather observations that we end up using to assess the skill of our climate models. And that has repercussions on the skill of these models. And so I think, again, that's really important and necessary that we continue to dig into that question. And so that's my perspective from atmospheric science. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And Jen, go back.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all the examples that people have given. I'll say, you know, kind of on a one level up from that, I think a place where we need a lot more people is people who have insights into kind of a technology, and then also a space where that technology is going to be applied, which I actually think is inherent in everybody's answer here. So I'm a computer scientist. The reason I like being in the iSchool, for example, is because in computer science, I would have a hard time like being considered serious for talking about say this alt-right stuff, right, or the social implications of social media. But it's really important. Like, people want to know, like, I understand the algorithms, and I can also tell you how those algorithms are affecting these systems, whether it's the alt-right, whether it's you want to become an influencer and like live off your social media account, whatever it is. It's being able to translate that from the technical space into an applied place that people care about, and that requires deep knowledge and expertise of the place that you're applying it as well. In computing especially, there's a lot of ego among computer scientists that are like, well, we have all this data in machine learning and we're going to solve all the world's problems. Like, I literally had an MIT computer science professor come up to me and he's like, well, we're going to solve like war and poverty. And I was like, you know, people have been working on that for a long time. He's like, yeah, but we're smarter than they are. And I'm like, oh, in like 15 years of machine learning, you're going to just solve all the world's problems. And it's like, oh, what actually is, you have no idea about how economies work and about how political strife works, all of these things. There's a lot of ego with technology that's quite powerful to think you can just kind of waltz into a space, not understand it, apply it, and fix everything. So I think people who actually have like two areas of expertise in a technology and an applied space and can really intelligently integrate those, that's going to be important in every single technology and every application space. So like, pick the two that you really like, and you're going to be the most in-demand person, because there's not many people who have that kind of connection.
Great. And Dan, looks like you have something to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to agree on that last bit that you mentioned about building stuff and the hubris of thinking you can solve everything. There's a lot of things that are inherently human, and trying to pile technology on top of technology is not usually a good way to solve those problems. I'm fully behind that. So I think questioning whether what you're doing is actually achieving what you want it to do is necessary.
And I'll say for my answer to the question, I think this is sort of an echo of what Jen said, but I think collaboration is going to be an important specialization, both between technology specialists and community, especially under-resourced communities, but being able to actually genuinely collaborate in a partnership kind of way as opposed to having things done for you. I think that the idea, and this is my passion too, is the idea of getting both academics across disciplines, working together to solve problems. And I kind of like the aspirational things where people say they're going to solve world hunger and, just the really big questions, because at least they're going for it. And if they can come up with new technology ways of addressing those kind of questions, even if they don't completely solve it, they hopefully will do a lot of good and come up with insights. So one of the things I think it's really great that you could be part of this information challenge is that you're getting exposed to a lot of different voices, including each other's, that hopefully will inspire you to collaborate in the near future and as you proceed through your academic career and your career. So I don't see any questions and I don't see any hands up. Are there any other questions?
There's a question in the chat.
Thank you for pointing that out to me. It is, I believe, from, yes, this is from Ms. Goldbeck. How is prediction of crime based on data different from profiling for policing applications and crime prevention in general? Thanks, James.
That's such a good question. And I can talk deep on this one, but I'll try not to go too long because I want everybody else to have a chance. I've worked with the FBI. I've gone down to Quantico to the behavioral profiling unit and trained them on using some of these techniques. So I've really worked specifically on this problem of profiling like the FBI does, and then worked quite strongly against a lot of the machine learning based crime prediction because I see them as two really different things. So if you look at profiling like we traditionally think about psychological profiling, we're looking for patterns in the data. Traditionally, that's done by human experts with a lot of understanding of kind of the psychology of criminals, victimology, what do perpetrators look like? And technology can help them gain some deeper insights into those individuals. So we could take the data that we have about a suspected serial killer, run our algorithms on that to try to get some insight into other things that they're doing. There's going to be some error in that, and there always is in this kind of profiling, and that's okay. And I think you could even potentially do that with groups. So if we are, say, trying to look at what are the risk factors for, say, this particular gang, right? Who's likely to be brought in there, or someone who's going to be recruited into a militia group? What do those people look like? How do they get radicalized? That's one problem. But a lot of what we see in the machine learning space for prediction of crime ends up just kind of grabbing onto a bunch of high level patterns that echo much greater societal problems. So I'm in the state of Florida right now. I've been on sabbatical this year. In the state of Florida, there are algorithms used in a bunch of counties that predict recidivism. And I'll talk about what these do. So these are algorithms that are used both to determine if you're let out on bail, if you've been arrested but not convicted for a crime, and also if you're paroled, if you have been convicted and they're deciding whether to let you out before you've served the entirety of your sentence. So these are machine learning algorithms. They put in a whole bunch of data from stuff that you fill out, and they predict your risk of committing a crime again in the future. And then they use that to decide whether or not you get out of jail. People have audited these algorithms, and they're extremely racially biased. So if there's a white person and a black person, and they've committed the same crime, and they've got exactly all the same traits, the white people are going to get out first. This comes out of a whole, and this is actually a problem in basically everything where you're applying machine learning to social problems. Artificial intelligence algorithms, machine learning, they just learn by looking at what people have done in the past based on certain data and then trying to replicate what people have done. And people have traditionally done racist things and sexist things and biased things in all kinds of ways. And so the algorithms will learn to do that also. And it's really hard to get that out of there. And what we see in a lot of crime prediction, that it's basically here's a poor neighborhood that often is not white in whatever way. There's going to be more crime there, so pay more attention to that and send more police resources there and arrest more people. And you just kind of cycle the problem. It doesn't actually look at how do you solve the problem, because it's much more simplistic than what the reasons actually are. So, it's accurate in a way that like you may see more crime in those places. And hey, if you send more police there and you arrest more people for it, then you're also going to keep seeing more crime there, right? Like you've got a kind of cycle that feeds itself. So I just think that for the crime prediction kind of technology doesn't, I mean, it's exactly the thing that I said in response to the previous question. It's people building tech without really understanding like crime as a intellectual academic problem, right? There's a lot of deep understanding of what causes it. And if you just apply tech to it without understanding that, you come up with something that's not useful. That said, you know, I think there's a place for this in the kind of anti-terrorism space, in the, you know, crime fighting space generally. It's just not how it's typically applied now. And unfortunately, that's not the way that makes the most money, right? You make a lot of money selling general solutions to police departments, even though they're not great.
You very much. Donald, do we have time for one more question?
We can do one more if it's short.
Okay. So do I hear, I'm going to just put a call out. Do anybody have a short question, brief question for a final question? If you don't, I will ask a brief one of everyone. And not seeing any, I will simply ask you, just in having heard all of your co-panelists, is there a word, like a sentence or two of advice for the students who are observing this panel? Maybe advice that you would give to yourself when you were in high school, now that you know with all your career that you've talked about. Because I think your careers were really varied and interesting, all of them. And so I just wanted to hear if you could have a brief answer for each of you. And I'll start with, I guess, Dan this time and just work my way through.
All right. I guess the one thing I'd suggest is find what gives you energy and pursue it. And what gives you energy is not necessarily what you're already good at. It can be. And that's it.
Very good, very brief too. James Neal, Mr. Neal.
Help me to understand the question again, Andy.
So I'm just asking you, so having heard the other panelists and also reflecting on your own remarks and thinking about the students who are listening to this, do you have a sentence or two that you might give as advice to them, but also advice you might have given to yourself when you were in high school, if you, having experienced the career you've had, looking back, what's the advice you would give?
Yeah, well, you know, I reflected on in my presentation on kind of the vicarious nature and circuitous nature that my career took based on a number of different things that happened to me within the society and the way that trends and currents were going in the economy. But I also really admire really good friends of mine who I know that went to college that knew they wanted to be a doctor or knew that they wanted to be an engineer. I have a really good friend who knew even early on when we were like young kids that he wanted to be a fashion designer, and he's gone on to become a fashion designer. So I think you have to have that, you know, flexibility and agility to go with what is happening in the world. But also, if you are certain or feel that you're certain about what you want to pursue, go ahead and find that direct path and pursue it. But keep in mind, things always change.
Very good. Thank you. And Stephen Castellucci.
Thank you. Yeah. So similar to what James Neal was saying, it's wonderful to have a career direction from an early start. But if that direction were to change, it's not necessarily your fault. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Always be open to be flexible, agile, open to new opportunities, and just see what happens.
Very good. Great. Thank you so much, Maria Molina.
I guess looking back at my own experiences when I was a graduate student, I was absolutely terrified of computer programming. And I just want to say to those of you out there that may be intimidated by computer programming or software to try not to be. I was really bad at it, and after much practice, I got much better. I'm sure not anywhere near as good as our panelists, but nonetheless, I'm able to, it's really empowering to be able to look at data and ask questions of it, and it's really fun, and it's become one of my most fun activities now. So just a shout out motivation for those of you that may be intimidated or struggling with it.
That's great and very inspirational. Thank you. And finally, Jen Goldbeck.
I think I would extend on Dan's advice to, find the things that energize you and be willing to work really hard to learn the things that you have to do for that. But don't resist doing things that come naturally to you either. That is a thing that I've done a lot, where I've had this big vision of this great thing I was going to do. And then there was like a thing in front of me that like I totally could do. And I was like, but I should do something bigger. And actually it's been great to do the stuff I'm naturally good at, and I could actually have a bigger impact there. So if there's something where you find yourself like just being naturally really good at it, like see what you can do in that space and, do the hard work there, because oftentimes it's a space you can have a lot of impact.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much to all of the panelists. It was just a tremendous group of speakers with wide and varied backgrounds. Thank you for the participants. If any of you have a question for any of the speakers individually or for all of them, you should feel free to email the conveners of the conference and ask them to get information back to you. So with that, I think I'll turn it, I believe, to Donal. I'm giving it back to you to.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Just emphasizing our appreciation for the panelists and how interesting and diverse those careers were. And I know I learned a lot. I wish this could last all afternoon, personally. And those were great questions. Also, follow Dr. Goldbeck's dogs on Twitter. It's worth it. So that's going to be the end of this Zoom at 2:45. For the students, we're going to move over to the awards ceremony. And starts with an overview of our academic programs, and then we'll go into the awards ceremony with our excellent MC, Dr. Shilton, which is also going to be live streaming on YouTube. So head over to the iSchool's YouTube page if you want to see it and you're not one of our campers. Otherwise, thank you very much. And I'm going to stop recording so that